you how I harvest a worm bin today. This is the equipment that I use. The first thing is a 23-gallon tote. I also use a 7-gallon black feed bowl. I use a 2-quart measure. And I use a screen that I make myself, which is an 1/8 mesh screen that's been put into a 13-quart galvanized watering dish for horses. And this fits nicely inside of this tote, and when I'm sifting, I can shake it back and forth like that. The castings will go through, and the worms will be left on the top of the screen, which I'll then put back into the worm bin. So here's the worm bin that we're going to be harvesting, and right now I'm going to take these things out of the way, and I'm going to take the top off the worm bin. It's held on with an elastic strap. I take that off, and then I take off the row cover that keeps the air going in and out of the bin, keeps flies out. Here's some fly paper that's inside the top of the bin to catch flies if any flies are hatched out inside the bin. I have to take that out of the way. Then I have to go down a little deeper. These are 2 sheets of newspaper that are put in there to help keep the top of the bin dry, and also to keep the top of the bedding dark. And then underneath those is 2 plastic bags that hold in the moisture and keep the top of the bedding nice and moist for worms to be able to live in. And you can see the worms right here on top of the paper, and you can see the holes that the worms have eaten through the paper. We're going to put those 2 together and put them out of the way underneath the table like that. And this is now ready to harvest, and to do that I'm going to tip it upside down in this big tote here. Like this. And now the tote is empty. We have a little bit of worm castings here on the side. I'm going to scrape those in with a rubber scraper. So if you go around over there, Sam, and point it in here, maybe you can see what I'm doing. You can scrape with a scraper like that to get the castings off the side. And then you can use a paintbrush to kind of sweep them out. And I repeat that on this side, scraping and sweeping. Then we put, that's the bin that we're going to be putting our rejects from our harvest into. And right now we've got the newspaper that was on the bottom of the bin, and we're going to put those pieces of newspaper in a tote that we've got stored down here out of the way. And then we got some more newspaper, and then we've got the wooden base. So now we're down to the wooden base, and we're going to put the wooden base back into the worm bin that we just dumped. But underneath the wooden base, we're going to put in 3 sections of newspaper, which helps to keep the bottom of the bin dry underneath the wood. So then in goes the wooden base, and now we've got here, this is the 2 pounds of newspaper that was on the bin for the last 3 or 4 months. It's no longer dry because it's been absorbing leachate that's come down through the bedding and accumulated in this dry paper, and now it's getting wet enough that it's time to change it and put in dry. So this is extra. We're going to put that into the spare bin for now, and it can be used to make bedding if we need it. Okay, over here, we're now going to put 2 pounds of dry newspaper on top of the wood. The wood gives a place for air underneath the vermiculture so we can be sure that our system stays aerated. And this paper right now is dry, but in 3 to 4 months it will be wet because it will absorb again all the water that's released by the food as the food decomposes and goes to the bottom of the bin. So every 3 or 4 months we have to change out the wet paper and put it in dry to keep the bottom of our bin from getting too wet. All right, now back in here, what we now have over here is we have all the worm castings, which is the stuff here that looks like soil. We have the worms, we have some bedding, we have some seeds, we have some stickers that don't decompose. And what we're going to do is we're going to screen this stuff to separate the castings from All right, so now we've moved all of the material that we're going to screen over to one side of the 23-gallon tote. We're going to put our sieve in here, and we're going to use a 2-quart measure so that we don't put too much in the sieve at once, to measure out approximately 2 quarts to put into the screen. Okay, then once we've done that, we're going to start the sifting process, which means just shaking it back and forth, turning the screen about 90 degrees, shake it back and forth, turn the screen about 90 degrees, shake it back and forth, and then every once in a while, hammer it so that the screen stays clean. What will happen if you don't do that is the screen will plug. So this keeps the screen from plugging. And after you've done that for a while, then you can take a peek to see if there's any castings left. And pretty much all the castings have gone through. This is all bedding and worms here. And down here we have the worm castings that went through the sieve. So now we're going to dump this, the bedding and the worms, into the worm bin, and we're going to use the black bowl over here, Sam, to help us clean the screen. See how the screen is starting to build up? After we tapped it a few times, the screen is clean and we're ready to do another one. So we just keep repeating this until we've screened all of the material through the sieve. Okay, when you're sifting, you're going to find things that haven't decomposed. One of the things you're going to find is the skin of tomatoes. They're very slow to decompose. The skin resists decomposition more than the inside. So the inside's all gone, but the outside is still left, and it's like almost like a paper. Here's a stem of a squash. That also will eventually decompose, but it takes a long time. Here's what's left of a piece of a corn cob. The interesting thing about this is when you open it up, you often find worms inside. And in fact, there's a worm, but I don't know what kind of worm it is. It's a different kind of worm than what I'm used to, because well, I guess it's the same kind. It's just very light in color. But that's actually was right inside the corn cob. right, this is the final sift here. Okay, that's the final sift. Now I want to talk about the moisture level. These worm castings are what I consider to be moist and crumbly, and if you squeeze them like that, they easily break apart and they don't stick together. If the moisture of the castings is like that, it's easy to harvest them for sieve through a sieve. If on the other hand these were wetter and muddy, they'd stick together and they wouldn't go through the sieve. So this process only works if you have castings that are moist and crumbly. If you have a wet and muddy bin, you're going to have to dry it out by adding dry material to it and letting it rest for about 30 days before you're going to be able to harvest it. So these are the castings that we harvested from this bin, and now we're going to set those aside for a minute. And we're going to set up this bin to start the new harvest cycle. So in the bottom of this bin we have the dry paper that we put in. We've put all the worms back in here. We've put in all the bedding that didn't go through the sieve. Some of the food, like the avocado skin, didn't go through the sieve, so it's going back into the worm bin for another 3 to 4 months, see if it'll be decomposed the next time around. Over here we have the stuff that we knocked out of our sieve while we were harvesting, and we're going to use the paintbrush to put that back into the worm bin too. That's got some little worms in it, and we want those back in the bin. All right. Now this this bin doesn't have now quite enough bedding in it. I like to run the bedding so that it's up to this line right here, which is about 4 inches down from the top lip of the bin. So we're going to tear up some bedding now and put it in here until it comes up to this line. And we're going to use the base paper that we set aside after we dump the bin. We have this base paper over here, which is very suitable to tear up now and make into bedding. Base paper is full of nutrients that leached out of the food and went down towards the bottom of the bin during the last 3 to 4 months while we've been feeding. And so the base paper has got nutrients in it. It's also got microbes in it. It's also got worms in it. So it's an ideal material to use for bedding. You don't have to add any water to it because it's already got enough moisture in it from the leachate to have it wet enough for worms to live in. The worm's skin has to be moist in order for the worm to be able to breathe. So the bedding has to be moist, and you can see there's worms right in the newspaper living here, so we know that the newspaper is suitably moist for the worms to survive. So you tear it up into strips, and after you get it torn up a bit, then you fluff it up to try to get some air into it. Because right now, without fluffing it up, it's all pretty compact. So to fluff it up, you just kind of rub it together like this to break that stuff apart a bit and get more air into it. And you keep doing this until you get enough in here to fill the bin up to that line. Okay, so we're finishing up with tearing up the bedding that we're adding to the bin to get the level for the worms to live in back up to the level that it was when we started, which is right up to this line. The worms will eat the food that we put in here, but they'll also eat the bedding. So over a 3-month period, the bedding drops, and you have to always add some. But we haven't had to add all the bedding. If you look over here, we still have this much paper that came out of the bin that we haven't used to make bedding. So this is leftover, and you can use this as a weed block in your garden or underneath mulch. You can put it down on the soil, just a couple of sheets of it, and then put mulch on top of it, and it works as a good weed block. You can also put it under chips, make a chip path out of it so the weeds won't grow up through it. So that's leftovers. We don't need that. Now, if I was feeding at this time, I would go ahead and feed right now. We're going to skip feeding, and we're just going to put the worm bin back together. And to do that, we go put everything back in the reverse order. We put the plastic in on top to hold the moisture in. And we put the newspaper on top of that to make it dark. And also, this newspaper helps to keep the wall of the worm bin dry so the worms won't crawl up the sides. And then if you are using fly paper, this bin has fly paper in it, so we're going to put the fly paper back in it. That's in case some of the food that's added to the bin has eggs in it from flies, and otherwise they would fly out of the bin when I take the cover off, but because I have fly paper in there, they'll get stuck. And we'll put the cover on, the row cover, which is for ventilation and also to keep the insects both in if there's any in, and out if there's any out. And this bin is now ready to go back into the worm farm, and I will, after I get it back downstairs where the food is, we'll feed this bin, we'll put it back into the worm farm. So this bin has now been harvested, and it's ready to be fed for about 3 to 4 months. And then at the end of 3 or 4 months, we'll harvest it again. Now we're going to see what we harvested in terms of castings. To do this, we use some kind of a measuring system. You can measure your castings either by weight or by volume. What I'm going to do today is I'm going to measure it by weight. To do that, you tip up your bin on end like this. You use your brush to sweep all the castings down into one end. And then I have a waste paper basket set up with a tall white kitchen bag in it to hold the castings. And I use plastic because if you use something the microbes can eat, like a paper bag, they'll eat their way right through the paper bag. So they have to be stored in something that they can't eat. Plastic fits the bill. And then try to pour your castings in without them going all over the place. You use your brush again. Just sweep them in to the corner and then out of the corner. Alright, so now we've got some castings stored in a plastic bag, and to find out how many are there, we're going to weigh them on a scale. So we put the plastic bag inside of a paper bag to give us some stiffness and rigidity, so it will hold itself on the scale. And then Sam, you tell me how much it weighs.
About 5, I don't know what it is, 5 something.
5 something? That's almost exactly 5.
5 pounds?
5 pounds. So that's the harvest for this bin for this cycle. And that It's what you do to harvest the bin. Now the castings can be left like this. They're moist. The microbes are still alive. You leave it open to the air, and once in a while you just stir up the top to make sure that the dry castings on top are stirred up with the moist castings underneath. And you can use the castings anytime over the next 3 to 4 months.